They called him the Devil of Devonshire, a man who owned half of London and the heart of every debutante in it. Arthur Pembroke, the Duke of Ashford, could have anyone. But in the spring of 1889, he walked into the glittering chaos of the season and met the one woman who looked right through him. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his title. In fact, she hated everything he stood for. This is the true, untold story of how the most powerful man in England was brought to his knees by a penniless widow with a dangerous secret. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. She was the only woman in London who didn't want the Duke. The season of 1889 began not with a whisper, but with the violent crash of thunder over Hyde Park. It was fitting, really, for the chaos that was about to ensue in the ballrooms of Mayfair. London was drowning in silk and desperation. Mothers were sharpening their claws, and daughters were cinching their corsets until breathing was a luxury they couldn't afford. The prize that year was singular, massive, and terrifying: Arthur Pembroke, the 8th Duke of Ashford. Arthur was 32, possessing a fortune that made the treasury look destitute and a reputation that made vicars cross themselves. He was a man of hard angles and harder eyes, with a jawline that looked like it had been cut from granite by a resentful sculptor. He stood 6'3" in his stocking feet, and when he walked into a room, the air usually left it. Tonight, the room was the gilded ballroom of Lady Jersey's mansion on Berkeley Square. The orchestra was soaring away at a Strauss waltz, but no one was listening. 500 pairs of eyes were fixed on the double doors. When Arthur entered, the hush was immediate. He paused at the top of the stairs, his face bored, his eyes scanning the sea of pastel dresses like a general surveying a battlefield he had already conquered. He hated this. He hated the smell of lavender water and desperation. He hated the way women simpered and men fawned. He was the catch of the century, and he felt more like a fox being hunted by a pack of hounds in diamond collars. "God, look at them," Arthur muttered to his companion, Lord Sealers Blackwood. Sealers was a rake of the highest order, but even he looked overwhelmed. "It's a meat market, Sealers. And I am the prime cut. You're the only cut, Artie," Sealers laughed, sipping champagne. "Just pick one. Lady Genevieve is wearing enough red silk to signal a ship at sea. She's been staring at you for 10 minutes without blinking." Arthur sighed, adjusting his cuffs. "I don't want a wife who stares. I want a wife who leaves me alone." He descended the stairs, and the mob descended on him. Introductions, curtsies, giggles. It was a suffocating wave of flattery. And then he saw her. She was standing near a potted palm in the far corner, dangerously close to the exit. She wasn't wearing pastel. She was wearing a dress of midnight blue velvet, fashionable but darker than the prevailing style, and perhaps a season or two out of date. It was the dress of a woman who didn't care to keep up, or couldn't afford to. But it wasn't the dress that caught Arthur's attention. It was her face. While every other woman in the room was beaming at him like a lighthouse, this woman was looking at him with an expression of profound, unadulterated annoyance. She held a glass of punch in one hand and a small, leather-bound notebook in the other. She scribbled something down, looked up at him again, frowned as if he were a stain on the carpet, and went back to writing. Arthur froze. The crowd around him blurred. Who, Arthur asked, cutting off a duchess mid-sentence, is that? Sealers followed his gaze. Oh, that's the widow Sterling. Beatrice Sterling, a widow, husband died 3 years ago. Some minor military officer. Left her with nothing but a crumbling cottage in Kensington and a sharp tongue. She's irrelevant, Arthur. She has no money, no connections, and she's 27. Ancient, Arthur didn't hear him. He was already moving. He needed to know why she was looking at him like that. He was Arthur Pembroke. People didn't look at him with annoyance. They looked at him with awe or fear. He carved a path through the crowd, ignoring the gasps of the mothers he bypassed. He stopped directly in front of her. She didn't look up. She kept writing, her pen scratching aggressively against the paper. Mrs. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice a deep baritone that usually made knees weak. Beatrice Sterling finished her sentence, dotted an I with a vicious stab, and slowly raised her eyes. They were grey, the colour of the Thames on a rainy Tuesday. Intelligent, tired, and utterly unimpressed. Your Grace, she said. She didn't curtsy. She barely nodded. You seem distracted, Arthur said, leaning closer, invading her space. Most women would have stepped back. Beatrice held her ground. I am working, she said flatly. Working. At a ball, observing human folly is a full-time job, Your Grace. And tonight the harvest is bountiful, Arthur blinked. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, a genuine one, something he hadn't felt in years. And am I the folly? Beatrice took a sip of her punch. You are the sun, Your Grace. The folly is the planets spinning themselves dizzy, trying to get into your orbit. It's making me nauseous. The air between them crackled. This wasn't banter, it was a dissection. You don't want to spin, Arthur challenged, a smirk playing on his lips. Every woman here wants a dance. Surely you have a dance card, Beatrice snapped her. Notebook shut. I do. And it is entirely full, Arthur frowned. He looked around. I haven't seen you dance once. Who is on your card? Nobody, Beatrice said sweetly. I filled it with the names of fictional characters, so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone. I believe I am promised to Mr. Darcy for the next quadrille, and Hamlet for the waltz. Hamlet is a terrible dancer, brooding and all, but he's better company than you. Arthur stared at her. The rejection was so absolute, so casual, it was stunning. You're refusing the Duke of Ashford. I am refusing a man who thinks his title is a substitute for a personality, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than a scream. Go away, Your Grace. Go find a debutante who wants to count your money. I have a headache and you are loud. She turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing through the terrace doors. Arthur stood there, alone in the middle of the crowd. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He felt insulted. He felt furious. And for the first time in his life, he felt alive. "Sealers," Arthur said, as his friend caught up to him. "She cut you dead," Sealers whispered, horrified. "The little witch. Shall I have her removed?" Arthur watched the curtains sway where she had vanished. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "No," Arthur said. "Find out everything about her. Where she lives, who her creditors are, what she eats for breakfast. Everything." "Why?" "Because," Arthur said, straightening his tie, "that is the woman I am going to marry." Beatrice Sterling walked out of Lady Jersey's mansion and into the cool London night, her heart racing faster than she would ever admit. She hailed a hansom cab, giving the driver an address in Kensington that was respectable, but only just. As the carriage rattled over the cobblestones of Piccadilly, Beatrice slumped back against the worn leather seat and let the mask fall. Her hands were shaking. "I just insulted the Duke of Ashford," she thought, pressing her cold palms to her burning cheeks. "I just told the most powerful man in England that he was boring." It was madness. It was suicide. But it was also necessary. She pulled the small leather notebook from her reticule. To the world, Beatrice Sterling was a poor widow scraping by on a small pension. But in the smoky backrooms of Fleet Street, she was known by a different name, Cato. Cato was London's most vicious political satirist. For 2 years, her columns in the Daily Chronicle had exposed corruption, mocked the aristocracy, and brought down 2 members of Parliament. No one knew Cato was a woman. If they found out, she wouldn't just be ruined, she would be jailed. Libel laws were harsh, and Beatrice's pen was venomous. She opened the notebook to the page she had been writing on when the Duke approached her. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a sketch. It was a caricature of Arthur Pembroke. She had drawn him as a peacock with a crown, strutting over a pile of starving beggars. It was cruel. It was brilliant. And it was going to be on the front page of the Chronicle by Friday. "He is the problem," she whispered to the empty carriage. "Men like him." Beatrice hated the aristocracy. Her husband, Thomas, had been a good man, a captain in the army who died because a wealthy general, a cousin of the Duke of Ashford, in fact, had ordered a suicidal charge to secure a medal for himself. Thomas died in the mud, and the general got a knighthood. Beatrice got a folded flag and a lifetime of poverty. She had sworn then that she would use her only weapon, her mind, to tear them down. And Arthur Pembroke was the ultimate target. He was the symbol of everything wrong with the empire: excessive wealth, unearned power, and total apathy toward the suffering of the poor. The cab pulled up to her small terraced house on a narrow street in Kensington. It was dark, save for a single gas lamp flickering down the road. She paid the driver and hurried to her door, fumbling for her key. As she stepped inside, the smell of old paper and tea greeted her. It was a lonely house. "Mrs. Sterling," the voice came from the shadows of her small sitting room. Beatrice gasped, dropping her keys. She reached for the umbrella stand, grabbing a heavy brass handle like a club. "Who is there?" she demanded. A figure stepped into the moonlight, filtering through the window. It wasn't a burglar. It was Mr. Galloway, the editor of the Chronicle. He looked pale, his hat ringing in his hands. "Galloway," Beatrice hissed, lowering the umbrella. "You can't be here. If anyone sees you." "We have a problem, Beatrice," Galloway said, his voice trembling. "A big problem." Beatrice lit a kerosene lamp, the yellow light illuminating her small, cluttered desk covered in inkwells and proofs. "What is it?" "Did the Home Secretary complain about the sketch of his mistress?" "No." "It's the Duke," Beatrice froze. "What about him? He's bought the paper," Galloway said. The room seemed to tilt. Beatrice grabbed the back of a chair. "Ahead." "What? The Duke of Ashford bought the Daily Chronicle this afternoon. Lock, stock, and barrel. He owns the printing press, the building, and every contract. Including mine. And yours." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "Does he know? Does he know I am Cato?" "I don't think so," Galloway said, wiping sweat from his brow. "He sent a solicitor." The instructions were odd, Beatrice. "He doesn't want to change the editorial stance. He doesn't want to fire anyone. He only made one specific demand." "What?" "He wants Cato to write a profile on him. An exclusive. He wants Cato to shadow him for the next month. Access to his home, his meetings, everything. He says he wants to set the record straight about his life." Beatrice sank into the chair. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Had he recognized her handwriting? No, that was impossible. Had he seen the sketch? "If I refuse?" she asked. "Then he shuts the paper down," Galloway said grimly. 40 men lose their jobs. And you? Well, you lose the only income you have. Beatrice looked at the lamp flame, dancing violently in the draught. Arthur Pembroke wasn't just a peacock. He was a predator. He had been insulted, and now he was circling. He didn't know she was Cato, she reasoned. He just wanted to control the narrative. He wanted to buy the voice that was mocking him. But this was also an opportunity. An unprecedented one. Access to his home. Access to his private meetings. If she accepted, she wouldn't just be writing a profile. She would be a spy in the enemy's camp. She could find the dirt that would destroy him completely. She could avenge Thomas. But it meant being near him. It meant enduring his arrogance, his scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco, his penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see too much. He wants Cato, Beatrice whispered, a dangerous smile touching her lips. Fine. He can have Cato. She looked up at Galloway. Tell the Duke that Cato accepts. But on one condition. What condition? I do the interviews. Me. Beatrice Sterling. Tell him I am Cato's research assistant, his transcriptionist. Tell him Cato is an invalid, a recluse who never leaves his house. I will be the go-between, It was the perfect cover. She could be close to him, ask the hard questions, and he would never suspect that the poor, dull widow was the one sharpening the knife. "Are you sure about this, Beatrice?" Galloway asked. "The Duke is not a man to be trifled with." "Neither am I, Mr. Galloway," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirts. "Neither am I." The next morning, a carriage with the ducal crest, 2 lions rampant, arrived at her small house in Kensington. The neighbours peered out from behind their curtains as a footman in blue livery knocked on her peeling front door. Beatrice was ready. She wore her most severe grey dress, her hair pulled back so tight it hurt. She clutched her notebook like a shield. The footman handed her a note. It was on thick, cream-coloured cardstock, sealed with red wax. She broke the seal. The handwriting was bold, jagged, and aggressive. "Mrs. Sterling, my carriage will bring you to Ashford House. Pack a bag. The interviews will take place at my country estate in Kent. We leave within the hour. Do not bore me. Ashford." Beatrice crumpled the note in her fist. He was kidnapping her. Technically, it was employment, but it felt like an abduction. To Kent. That was hours away. She would be trapped with him. She grabbed her small valise, threw in her clothes, her ink, and her sharpest quills. As she climbed into the carriage, sinking into velvet squabs that cost more than her house, she looked out at the grey London street. "I will expose you, Arthur Pembroke," she thought. "I will write the truth about you, and by the time I am done, you will wish you had never walked into that ballroom." The carriage lurched forward. The game had begun. Ashford Hall did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress built to withstand a siege of silence. The journey from London had taken 4 agonizing hours. Beatrice had expected the Duke to ride with her, to torment her with his arrogance, but he had ridden ahead on horseback, leaving her alone in the carriage with her thoughts and her dread. When the carriage finally crunched over the gravel of the long, winding drive, Beatrice peered out the window. The estate was staggering. Turrets pierced the grey Kent sky, and the grounds were manicured to within an inch of their life. It was beautiful, cold, and imposing, much like its master. The carriage door opened, and Arthur stood there. He had changed from his riding gear into a casual tweed suit that probably cost more than a year's rent in Kensington. He looked windswept, his dark hair slightly messy, which annoyed Beatrice because it made him look human. "Welcome to purgatory, Mrs. Sterling," Arthur said, offering a hand. Beatrice ignored the hand and stepped down, clutching her notebook. "It is certainly large enough for a prison, Your Grace." Arthur's lips twitched. "You'll find the acoustics are excellent for brooding." "Come." "We start immediately." He didn't give her time to rest or freshen up. He marched her straight through a cavernous entrance hall, past rows of servants who bowed so low they looked like they were searching for dropped coins, and into a library that smelled of old leather and expensive scotch. "Sit," Arthur commanded, pointing to a wing-back chair by the fire. He poured himself a drink, not offering her one. "You said you are Carto's assistant. You are here to write a profile. So ask." Beatrice opened her notebook. She felt like a mouse in a cage with a bored panther. She needed to find his weak spots. "Cato wishes to know," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "why a man of your fortune spends his nights gambling at white and his days ignoring the House of Lords. Do you feel no responsibility to the people who starve on your land?" Arthur froze, the glass halfway to his lips. He turned slowly, his blue eyes narrowing. "Starve," he repeated quietly. "Is that what Cato thinks happens on my land? It is what happens on all ducal lands," Beatrice parried. "You drain the rents to buy racehorses." Arthur slammed the glass down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "We are 5 minutes in, and already you bore me with stereotypes. If you want the truth, Mrs. Sterling, you will have to do better than recycled anarchist pamphlets." "Then give me the truth," Beatrice snapped, standing up. "You brought me here. You bought the paper. Why?" "Just to gloat, because," Arthur said, walking toward her until he loomed over her, "I want to know why you hate me." "Not Cato, you." "Beatrice Sterling." The widow in the velvet dress. Beatrice held her breath. He was too close. She could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. She could smell the rain on his coat. "I don't hate you," she lied. "I hate what you represent, liar," Arthur whispered. "You look at me as if I killed your cat. Or perhaps something more precious." He stared at her for a long moment, the tension stretching tight enough to snap. Then, abruptly, he stepped back. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. And wear something less grey." He stormed out, leaving Beatrice shaking in the middle of the room. She didn't retreat. As soon as the door clicked shut, Beatrice Sterling went to work. She began to prowl the library. A man's library was his soul. She scanned the titles. She expected the Jockey Club Gazette or French erotica. Instead, she found engineering manuals, agricultural treatises, books on tenant law and poetry. Blake, Keats, Shelley. She pulled a book from the shelf, a worn copy of Dante's Inferno. It fell open to a marked page. The margins were covered in notes, written in that same jagged, aggressive hand she had seen on the note in London. "The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crisis." Arthur had underlined it twice. Beatrice frowned. This didn't fit the profile. The Devil of Devonshire wasn't supposed to read moral philosophy. He was supposed to be a shallow narcissist. "What are you hiding, Arthur Pembroke?" she whispered. She heard footsteps in the hall and quickly shoved the book back. She had to be careful. If he caught her snooping, he would throw her out. But she needed more than books. She needed ledgers. She needed proof of his corruption to destroy him. And she had a feeling those ledgers were in the locked desk in the corner. 2 days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. By day, Beatrice followed Arthur as he inspected his estate. She expected him to ride past his tenants with a sneer. Instead, she watched in confusion as he stopped to argue with a drainage engineer about irrigation ditches, his boots deep in the mud, his hands gesturing wildly as he discussed soil acidity. He knew the names of his farmers. He knew which roofs were leaking. He was competent. It was infuriating. But by night, the distance returned. They ate dinner at a table long enough to seat 30, sitting at opposite ends, trading barbs like fencers. On the third night, a storm rolled in off the coast. Thunder rattled the windowpanes of Ashford Hall, and the rain lashed against the stone like a whip. Arthur had excused himself early, claiming a headache. Beatrice waited in her room until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight. The house was silent, save for the storm. Clad in her dressing gown, holding a candle, Beatrice crept down the grand staircase. The shadows stretched long and distorted against the walls. She felt like a thief, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the library door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, shielding the candle flame. The room was cold. She went straight to the massive oak desk. She tried the drawers. Locked. Of course. She pulled a hairpin from her messy bun. It was a trick she had learned from a pickpocket she had interviewed for an article on Newgate Prison. Twist, apply pressure, listen for the click. Click. The drawer slid open. Beatrice let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Inside, there were no scandalous love letters. No gambling debts. Just a heavy, leather-bound ledger. She opened it on the desk, bringing the candle closer. The pages were filled with columns of numbers and names. March 1889, Widow Jenkins rent forgiven. April 1889, the Smith family medical fees paid, cholera. May 1889, 4th Regiment Fund anonymous donation, £5,000. Beatrice froze. The 4th Regiment. That was Thomas's regiment. That was the regiment that had been slaughtered because of General Pembroke's order. She ran her finger down the page. The list went on. Pension for SGT. Miller's widow, schooling for CPL. Holloway's son, Arthur wasn't spending his fortune on horses. He was paying the debts of the dead. He was secretly funding the families of the men his cousin had killed. Looking for something, the voice came from the darkness. Beatrice gasped, spinning around. The candle fell from her hand and rolled onto the rug, extinguishing instantly. A flash of lightning illuminated the room. Arthur was sitting in the wingback chair by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He hadn't gone to bed. He had been watching her the whole time. Beatrice stammered, backing up against the desk. I was looking for paper in a locked drawer. Arthur's voice was low, dangerous. He stood up. Another flash of lightning lit his face. He looked exhausted, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes dark. He walked toward her, slow and steady. Beatrice was trapped between the desk and the Duke. "You are a terrible liar, Beatrice," he said. He didn't use her married name. You have been hunting for a monster since you arrived. Tell me, are you disappointed that you haven't found one? Beatrice's hand gripped the edge of the desk behind her. I found the ledger. The 4th Regiment. Why? Arthur stopped a foot away from her. The smell of rain and whiskey was intoxicating. Because it is my name, he said bitterly. My cousin gave the order. The Pembroke name is stained with that blood. The law says I am not responsible. My conscience disagrees. You pay their pensions, Beatrice whispered. Thomas, my husband, was in the 4th. Arthur went still. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I know, Arthur said softly. Captain Thomas Sterling. A brave man. He died trying to rally the flank. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. You knew, I know the name of every man who died that day, Arthur said. I read the reports. I tried to have Lucius court-martialed. The War Office buried it. They wouldn't let a Pembroke hang. So I do what I can. I pay for the sins of my blood. He looked at her, and the mask of arrogance was gone. He looked broken. Is that enough for your article, Cato? He asked. Beatrice's heart stopped. You know, she breathed. That you are Cato. Arthur gave a sad, dry chuckle. I've known since the ballroom. You have ink stains on your fingers, Mrs. Sterling. And you quote the same obscure philosophers in your column as you do in conversation. I'm not an idiot. Then why? Beatrice demanded, her voice shaking. Why bring me here? Why let me spy on you? Because, Arthur said, taking another step closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. I wanted you to see me. Not the Duke. Not the caricature you draw. Me, he reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He didn't touch her, but the air between them sizzled. You are the only person in London who doesn't want anything from me, Arthur whispered. Everyone else sees the title. You see the man. Even if you hate him. At least you see him. Beatrice looked up at him. The lightning flashed again, and she saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't the enemy. He was a prisoner of his own legacy, just like she was a prisoner of her grief. I don't hate you, she said, her voice barely audible. Arthur's gaze dropped to her lips. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them in the dark, storm-battered library. He leaned in. Beatrice didn't pull away. She wanted him to close the gap. She wanted to know if he tasted like the storm. Bang! The library door flew open. Light flooded the room from a lantern in the hallway. Arthur, a booming voice called out. Where are you, you miserable hermit? Arthur jerked back, the spell broken instantly. He turned toward the door, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. Standing in the doorway, shaking rain from a heavy cloak, was a man Beatrice recognized instantly. A man with a thick white mustache and cruel eyes. Uncle Lucius, Arthur said, his voice like ice. "General Sir Lucius Pembroke. The man who killed her husband." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. She backed into the shadows, but it was too late. "And who is this?" Lucius asked, stepping into the room and lifting his lantern to illuminate Beatrice's pale face. "A late-night visitor." "Arthur, you sly dog." Arthur stepped in front of Beatrice, shielding her. "She is my guest." "You are not." "Nonsense," Lucius boomed. "I'm here for the hunt tomorrow. The whole party is arriving in the morning. I just came early to secure the best room." Lucius peered over Arthur's shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Beatrice. "Sterling," Lucius muttered. "I know that face." "You're the captain's widow, aren't you?" Beatrice felt a wave of nausea. "Yes," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I am," Lucius laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Small world. Your husband was a fool, madam. Disobeyed orders. Got himself killed." "A pity." Beatrice lunged forward. She wanted to claw his eyes out. She wanted to scream. Arthur caught her arm. His grip was iron, holding her back, but not roughly. It was a restraint of protection. "Go to bed, Beatrice," Arthur said, his voice tight. "But go," Arthur commanded, his eyes pleading with her. "Now," Beatrice pulled her arm free. She looked at the general, then at Arthur. She turned and fled the room, running up the stairs as the tears finally fell. But she didn't go to bed. She went to her room, packed her bag, and grabbed her notebook. The game had changed. The villain was in the house, and Beatrice Sterling was going to burn them all down. The morning sun brought no warmth to Ashford Hall. The estate was buzzing with activity. Carriages were arriving, depositing the crème de la crème of London society for the Duke's annual hunting party, an event Arthur clearly loathed but was obliged to host. Beatrice had intended to leave at dawn. She had been halfway to the stables when Arthur intercepted her. "If you leave now," he had said, blocking her path in the mist, "he wins. Lucius wants you gone. He knows you're a reminder of his incompetence. I cannot breathe the same air as him," Beatrice had spat. "Then help me suffocate him," Arthur had replied. "Stay. Watch it. Write it all down. If you want to destroy the Pembroke legacy, don't do it from a distance. Do it from the dinner table." So she stayed. Now she sat at the long mahogany table for the formal dinner. The room was glittering with candlelight and diamonds. 20 guests were seated. Beatrice was placed on Arthur's left, a position of honor that caused Lady Genevieve, who had arrived with her mother, looking predatory, to glare. Daggers at her. General Lucius sat across from them, drinking heavily. "The problem with the modern army," Lucius was bellowing to the table, "is sentimentality. We treat soldiers like children. In my day, we knew that a few casualties were the price of glory." Beatrice gripped her silverware so hard her knuckles turned white. "Glory," Beatrice said. The table went quiet. Lucius looked at her, amused. Yes, madam. Glory? Is it glory to order a charge into a box canyon with no reconnaissance? Beatrice asked, her voice ringing clear in the silence. Is it glory to write letters to mothers telling them their sons died heroes, when they actually died because their commander was drinking brandy in a tent 3 miles away? The silence was deafening. Lady Genevieve gasped. Lucius's face turned purple. How dare you? Arthur, control your... Mistress. Arthur stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't throw his glass. He simply placed his hands on the table and leaned forward. The menace radiating from him was palpable. Mrs. Sterling is not my mistress, Lucius. She is my conscience. Arthur looked around the table. And she is right. There was no glory in the 4th Regiment's charge. It was a massacre, and it was ordered by a man who was more concerned with his promotion than his men. You slander me, Lucius shouted, slamming his fist on the table. I am a hero of the empires. I have the medals to prove it, medals bought with blood, Arthur said coldly. I have seen the reports, Lucius. The real ones. Not the ones you doctored for the War Office. Lucius laughed nervously, looking around for support. The boy is drunk. He doesn't know what he's saying. I have the ledger, Arthur said. Lucius froze. I have the ledger, Arthur repeated. The one where you recorded the bribes you paid to the quartermaster to cover up the supply shortages. The one you thought was lost in the fire at your London townhouse. Beatrice looked at Arthur. He had the dirt. He had it all along. I didn't find it until recently, Arthur said, his eyes locked on his uncle. It was in the estate archives, misfiled. I have been waiting for the right moment to give it to the authorities. I think tonight is that moment. You wouldn't, Lucius hissed. It would ruin the family name. We would be pariahs. I don't care about the name, Arthur said. I care about the truth. Arthur turned to Beatrice. Mrs. Sterling. Or should I say Cato, Arthur announced to the shocked room. I believe you have an exclusive. The room erupted into chaos. Lucius stood up, his chair clattering backward. You traitor. You'll do nothing, Arthur said calmly. The constable is waiting in the library. As the servants moved to escort the spluttering general out, Arthur looked down at Beatrice. He looked tired, but for the first time he looked free. But the victory was short-lived. As the guests murmured and the dinner dissolved into scandal, a young man, Lucius's aide, rushed back into the room. He wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at Beatrice with wild, malicious eyes. You think you've won, the aide sneered. He held up a piece of paper. You think she's a saint, Your Grace. Ask her about this. He threw the paper onto the table in front of Arthur. Arthur looked down. Beatrice's heart stopped. It was a letter. But not just any letter. It was a draft Beatrice had written 3 days ago, intended for Galloway but never sent. The Duke is a fool. He is playing the benevolent landlord, but it is all a performance. I will find the crack in his armor. I will seduce the truth out of him if I have to. He is weak and he is falling for the act. It was written in a moment of anger, before the library scene, before she knew about the pensions. But reading it now, in the cold light of the dining room, it looked damning. Arthur read it. His face went blank. The warmth, the connection, the trust, it all evaporated instantly, replaced by the granite mask of the Duke of Ashford. Arthur, Beatrice said, reaching for his arm. That was before. I didn't mean. Arthur pulled away as if she had burned him. Seduce the truth out of me, he read quietly. He looked at her and his eyes were dead. Was that what happened in the library, Beatrice? Was that part of the job? No, Beatrice cried. No, I swear. Get out, Arthur whispered. Arthur, please listen. Get out, he roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier. The room went deadly silent. Leave my house, Arthur said, turning his back to her. Take your story. Take your victory. Just leave. Beatrice stood there, the paper trembling on the table. She had destroyed the general, yes. But in the process, she had destroyed the only man who had ever truly understood her. She turned and ran. She ran out of the dining room, out of the heavy oak doors, and into the dark, rainy night, leaving the Duke of Ashford alone once more in his fortress of silence. London was grey. Not the romantic, misty grey of a watercolor painting, but the suffocating, soot-stained grey of reality. Beatrice sat at her small desk in Kensington, the rain drumming a relentless, mocking rhythm against the windowpane. It had been a week since she fled Ashford Hall. 7 days of silence. 7 days of staring at a blank page. Mr. Galloway had been ecstatic when she returned. He had rubbed his hands together like a fly sensing a feast. Did you get it? He had asked, eyes gleaming. Did you get the dirt on the Duke? Is he a gambler? A libertine? Does he kick puppies? Beatrice had looked at him, her eyes hollow. I have a story, Mr. Galloway. But it is not the one you want. She had thrown a sheaf of papers onto his desk. It wasn't the profile on Arthur. It was the exposé on General Lucius Pembroke. The bribes. The doctored reports. The 4th Regiment massacre. It was the story that would vindicate her husband and destroy a war hero. This is dynamite, Galloway had whispered, reading the first page. But what about the Duke? The public wants the Duke. The Duke is off limits, Beatrice had said, her voice hard. But he owns the paper. If we don't give him what he wants, he doesn't want a profile, Beatrice had interrupted. He wants the truth. This is the truth. Now the newspaper sat on her desk. The Daily Chronicle. The headline screamed, Hero or Butcher. General Pembroke's secret war. It was the biggest story of the decade. London was in an uproar. The War Office had already launched an inquiry. Lucius was under house arrest. Beatrice Sterling, writing under her own name for the first time, was the toast of Fleet Street. She should have been happy. She had won. She had avenged Thomas. She had proven her worth. But she felt like she was bleeding out. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Arthur's face in the candlelight of the library. She saw the hurt in his eyes when he read that damned letter. I will seduce the truth out of him. It wasn't true. Not anymore. She hadn't seduced him to get a story. She had fallen in love with him because he was the only man who carried a weight as heavy as hers. She picked up her pen. She had one more story to write. Not for Galloway. Not for the public. For herself. She wrote feverishly, the ink staining her fingers, her tears blurring the words. She wrote about the man who fixed drainage ditches in the rain. The man who read Dante. The man who secretly paid the pensions of the soldiers. His family had failed. She wrote about the loneliness of a crown that wasn't royal, but financial. She titled it The Man Behind the Lion. She knew Galloway wouldn't print it. It was too soft, too personal. But she had to write it, if only to purge the ghost of him from her soul. Meanwhile, at Ashford House in Mayfair, the curtains were drawn. Arthur Pembroke sat in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table. He hadn't left the house in 3 days. The servants whispered that the Duke was ill. Silas Blackwood knew better. You look like a corpse, Artie, Silas said, breezing into the room without knocking. He threw a copy of the Chronicle onto Arthur's lap. Go away, Silas, Arthur grunted, staring at the fire. I am not in the mood for your wit. Read it, Silas commanded. I know what it says, Arthur. Snapped. She destroyed Lucius. Good for her. I gave her the ammunition, not that article, Silas said, tapping the paper. Turn to page 4. The editorial section. Cato has struck again, Arthur froze. He looked at the paper. He turned the page. There in the center column was a piece titled, The Silent Duke, a Defense. Arthur's breath hitched. He began to read. We are quick to judge the powerful by the shadow they cast, assuming darkness where there is often only solitude. We call them arrogant because they do not bow, but perhaps they do not bow because they are holding up the sky for those beneath them. Arthur read on. It detailed the pensions, the drainage, the engineering books. It spoke of a man who was cursed by his own competence and imprisoned by the expectations of a society that valued his title more than his heart. It ended with a line that made Arthur's hand tremble. I went looking for a monster to slay. Instead, I found a man I was unworthy to know. London may call him the Devil of Devonshire, but to those who have seen him in the storm, he is simply Arthur. And he is the only decent man among us. It was signed simply, B.S. Arthur stared at the page. The ink seemed to swim. She hadn't written a hit piece. She had written a love letter, a public apology. She had risked her reputation as a satirist to defend the very man she was supposed to hate. She loves you, you idiot, Silas said softly, pouring himself a drink. She just decimated the War Office for you. And now she's trying to rewrite your reputation with the ink from her own veins. Arthur stood up. The glass of whiskey tipped over, soaking the rug, but he didn't care. "Where is she?" Arthur demanded. "Kensington," Sealers said, checking his pocket watch. "Though I imagine she's packing. After that article, the anarchists will probably try to burn her house down for being a class traitor." "Let them try," Arthur growled. He grabbed his coat. "Get the carriage." "I already did," Sealers grinned. "It's waiting out front. Try not to trample the flower beds when you get there." Arthur was already out the door. Beatrice was indeed packing. Not because of anarchists, but because she couldn't stay in London. The memories were too loud. She would go to the countryside. Maybe Cornwall. Somewhere with no newspapers and no dukes. She snapped the latch on her trunk. There. It was done. Her life in 2 boxes. A thunderous knocking on her front door made her jump. "Mrs. Sterling," a voice roared. It wasn't the landlord. It wasn't the postman. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had commanded a dining room into silence. She rushed to the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn. The lock. She threw it open. Arthur stood on her doorstep. He was drenched, it had started raining again, and he was breathing hard, as if he had run all the way from Mayfair. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his coat was ruined. He looked magnificent. "Arthur," she whispered. "You wrote it," he said. "No hello. No preamble." He held up the soggy newspaper. "Why?" Beatrice stepped back, letting him in out of the rain. "Because it was true. Because I couldn't let them think you were what I thought you were." Arthur kicked the door shut behind him. The small hallway felt suddenly microscopic with his presence. He tossed the paper onto the floor and looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I read the letter, Beatrice. The one on the table." "I know," she said, looking down. "I'm sorry. I was angry. I was foolish. I wanted to hate you so badly because liking you felt like a betrayal of Thomas." "And now," Arthur asked, taking a step closer, "do you still want to hate me?" Beatrice looked up at him. "I can't. I tried. God knows I tried. But you make it impossible." "Good," Arthur said. "Because I tried to hate you too. I tried to convince myself you were just a mercenary with a sharp pen. But then I remembered how you looked at me in the library, and how you stood up to Lucius. You are the bravest person I have ever met, Beatrice Sterling." He reached out and took her hands. His were warm, rough, and strong. "I don't want a duchess who smiles and waves," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I don't want a wife who stares at me like I'm a prize. I want the woman who looked at me with annoyance in the middle of a ballroom." Beatrice laughed, a wet, choking sound. "I was very annoyed. I want the woman who breaks into my desk, Arthur continued, pulling her closer. I want the woman who argues with me about moral philosophy at midnight. I want the woman who isn't afraid of the dark, or the rain, or the Pembroke name. Arthur, she breathed, I have nothing. I am a widow with a scandal attached to her name. The Chronicle. My reputation. I bought the Chronicle, Arthur reminded her, a smirk playing on his lips. I can fire the critics. And as for your reputation, let them talk. They've been talking about me for years. It's boring. Let's give them something real to talk about. And what would that be? Arthur let go of her hands and framed her face. As he kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, polite kiss. It was a claiming. It was a storm crashing into the shore. It tasted of rain and redemption and ink. Beatrice melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him.